Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the channel, where today we're going to be looking at the Behringer x32. Now, I have the, what do you call it? The producer edition of this mixer. Now, this mixer is kind of like they got in bed with Midas and I believe Yamaha and created this, what is it called again? The Sound Group or something like that. So at the time, Midas came out with like the same kind of design of the mixer along with Behringer. The Midas one uses a little better components. The Behringer kind of like copied the architect of what Midas did and used cheaper parts inside the mixer. Now, I'm not saying this is a downfall of the mixer. The mixer to me sounds good, and it is kind of like a centerpiece of my setup that allows me to perform live. Like, say, I want to play all my synths live. It's 16 channels in, 8 channels out, and it's got a bunch of auxes as well that you can use as inserts. So it has the ability to, go out and play live, or say I want to send audio from all these different pieces of analog gear into a DAW for recording, whilst at the same time having my DAW send out VSTs or samples or whatnot into the mixer to kind of have it as a central mixing point. It's a very crucial part of my setup, and it allows me to be, in a sense, latency free. So when I am in the DAW and I have things that are processed in the DAW, when it gets sent to the mixer, um, and say like MIDI is also sent out from the DAW to each individual instrument, it kind of like syncs everything up, keeps everything in its place. So you're not worried about like weird delays on certain things and everything. Now, this mixer also does act as like my DAC, so I can time delay because I don't know if you can see way back there, my subwoofer is in the back of the room. So there is a delay between my fronts, which is my main left and right, and the subwoofer. So I need to also delay the subwoofer in my setup. And with this mixer, I can do that as well as like EQ and do like filters. So I can set the cutoffs of my lefts and rights and set the cutoff of the subwoofer so it's nice and cohesive and it allows a nice flat frequency response across the room. Um, Now, as I'm going along, I kind of almost completely forgot we hit 100 subscribers, and I have to say a massive thank you to you all for subscribing to my channel. If you're new here, do give me a subscribe as it helps the channel immensely, and I'm trying to get to 1,000 subscribers, and the only way I can do that is with all of you out there. So, with all this said, let's get started. Okay, so this is going to be a fun one to film. As you can see on the camera down below, that's basically the mixer screen. And because this mixer is so feature filled, it's very important for me to have this camera here just so you can see exactly what's going on, what are the options with like all of the compressors and EQs, all the routing, basically everything that's inside this mixer shows up on that screen. Um, Now, as I said earlier, this is a 16 input, 8 output mixer, and there are 6 aux sends and returns. If you look on the front face here, there are 8, 16, 17 faders. And how this works is basically you can have your layers input 1 through 8 here. You click this button, it goes to 9 through 16, and then it goes to 17 through 24, where you can see I have my audio coming in from the microphone here. And then you go to channel 25 to 32. Now, this kind of acts as like your bus section, so to say. So right now we're on bus 1 through 8, and then you can go to bus 9 through 16, and then you can also go to your matrix sends. Now I will briefly cover like what is a bus, what is a matrix, and then this also does have DCA groups. I don't use DCA groups, so I'm not going to explain those. So basically a bus is like a place where you can group all your audio channels. Like say I wanted all of these 8 channels to go to one single group where I put a compressor on them, I would send these 8 channels to a bus. And then from that bus, it would go to my left and right. Now, what a matrix is a matrix is another layer on top of the bus. So basically, if I wanted to send a bus to, or I should say, a couple of buses to a matrix and group all of those buses into one group, that's where a matrix comes in. Now, for the purpose of my setup, I send everything to my left and right, and then my left and right channel goes to basically two matrices. So this is matrix 1, matrix 2, matrix 3, matrix 4, but they are grouped together just for stereo purposes. So I think I'll start here of kind of like explaining this mixer because this is a crucial part of my setup. So right now, obviously I have everything muted, my lefts and rights and my subwoofers muted. But right now I have basically my subwoofer is on matrix 1 and 2. And as you can see on the screen there, it is heavily EQ'd, and there's also the cutoff filter there. So when I was doing my room analysis, I noticed I needed to kind of like EQ my subwoofer to get a nice flat frequency response. And that's where this kind of setup in this mixer is being turned into a digital audio control, so to say. So that is basically my subwoofer. It's just got the EQ on it, no compression or anything. There's not a gate on this, just a simple EQ. Now, when I go to my left and rights, here it is also a very simple EQ, but I also have a 31 band EQ put on this as well to kind of like create a nice flat frequency response from my left and rights based on the measurements I took. Now, on the individual routing on my main lefts and rights, let me go over to the routing here. You can see there is a little delay section because, like I said, there is going to be a latency between my subwoofer that is at the back of the room and the audio coming from the subwoofer cohesing with the main left and rights. So this is where I took a measurement and I figured out that it's about 5.4 foot of a difference between where I sit in the room and where the audio, basically there's just a bunch of math where I figured out that there's a 5.4 foot difference. And with this, I can set a delay of, what is that, 4.8 milliseconds to be able to have the audio all hit that one central point and be time aligned, so to say. Now, as this mixer is very, very feature heavy, so to say, I'm just going to go to an individual channel. So now on the home page, you can see a bunch of stuff here where you've got from the left to the right, you've got your in, your gate, your insert, your EQ, your dynamics, and then basically your left and right and pan and everything. I'm actually going to go to what is being done to the audio right now, for example. So on this, I've got a 40 hertz, 48 volts, 48 volt phantom power turned on to this mic. And then when I go to a gate, you can see that this gate just basically cuts off the audio when I am not talking. So you don't get any of the like background noise over the recording, so to say. So when I move across here, next in line, there would be an insert. Now, this has a wide variety of options for inserts. So on the home insert page, let's just take a look at, say, this number 1 FX. So you get a bunch of different options of different like reverbs. So you got like a hall reverb, an ambience, a bunch of different reverbs, and these are all kind of modeled off of vintage pieces of gear. And in my opinion, the ones that are modeled off of vintage pieces of gear, for some reason in this mixer, technically they are a plugin, but they sound really good. And I don't know how to describe this, but I'm sure you've maybe come across this where you put a plugin on one of your channels in a DAW and it kind of adds this weird sheen, and it kind of sometimes they alter the stereo image a little bit. And they just kind of, they don't quite sound quite right compared to the original audio going into them. The plugins or insert effects on this mixer, I have to say, sound absolutely excellent. They just don't add the sheen whatsoever. Now, they're not quite, I don't know how to say, as robust or quite modeled as well as like modern plugins are, but they do the trick. And it's always good, in my opinion, to use as much DSP or as much computing power outside of the box. So when you are using heavy CPU related plugins, you can kind of have more of those inside your DAW session, so to say. Um, yeah, I try and use this mixer and its basically available plugins as much as possible just to kind of keep the latency down so I don't have to turn up the buffer rate within my DAW in order to have latency down and keep the CPU available for the plugins that I do actually need when I'm like, say, live recording. Like, say, I just started a track or something and I really like a sample that I'd rather just have going through a DAW into this mixer. I can do that, and at the same time, I can be playing live on whatever piece of gear and recording it back into Ableton where everything is time aligned. This is just like, I feel like a golden era of being able to do that with digital mixers instead of interfaces, and like having the ability to draw CPU power outside of the box into a mixer. And like, even with this mixer, if you go to one of the previous videos when I was wiring everything up there, I can use the 6 aux sends to then send to any outboard compressors or any piece of gear in my studio here and have it sent back into the mixer and then back into Ableton. It's just a routing dream is the best way I can describe it. And I highly suggest that you consider a digital mixer, especially at the price point of these. Like, I did notice on Reverb, these are getting kind of expensive on Reverb. I've seen them for like $2,400, where I think brand new they were only, I'm pretty sure, $1,800 or something like this. The price has shot up. I don't know why. It's probably because of the chip shortages and everything. But besides that, I feel this is a affordable option that gives you more robust options compared to just a simple interface, so to say. And it's just like, you can do anything with this. Yes, I kind of just went off on a tangent there. So we're just going to keep on going all the different effects here. So you got like, you've got a flanger, a chorus, delays. You've got like a couple of different ones that are like a mix of like a flanger, phaser, blah, 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 all this and that. Choruses, classic choruses. You've got filters, rotary speakers, tremolos, sub-octavers. Those are the kind of like flanger chambers, these delay effect or combination effects. You've got 31 band EQs. You've got de-essers that sound really good. You've got a Pultec clone, a couple of different ones. You've got a wave designer, a precision limiter. The limiter is pretty good on this. I wouldn't really highly suggest it. A combinator, which is a multi-band compressor. You got a Fairchild compressor, modeled thingy-majigger. Yeah, you've got a LA2A model. You've got a 1176 model. You've got an enhancer, which is like a stereo enhancer. You've got a stereo exciter. You've got an imager. You've got a sound maxer, which is based off of that BBQ. I can't remember the name of it, the red outboard thingy. You've got a guitar amp. You've got a tube amp. You got a pitch sifter, a stereo pitch, and that's it. So as we continue going across the, in a sense, the vocal section there. So there's the insert. Next up is the EQ. Now on each individual channel, you get a 4-band EQ that also has a low cut. Pretty simple. You get basically your Q, your frequency you can pick, your gain, you can turn it on and off here. You get a couple of different types of options of what is happening on the EQ. So for example, you can have a low cut, a low shelf, a PEQ, a VEQ, which is a passive EQ and a variable EQ, a high shelf and a high cut. And then moving back across, you can also do a compressor on this, which is a really good compressor that also gives you the ability to sidechain to different channels, as well as like the like say you just want the low end to be the sidechain detector, you can set it to like a low pass or a high pass or a band pass as well. The compressor honestly sounds really good on this. It is very transparent. Um, Everything on this mixer is actually really transparent now that I think about it. I guess we should almost start it with talking about the gain. Now, the gain on this is digital gain, so to say. And compared to the M32, which is essentially the same mixer, the M32 has British preamps in it that are true Midas preamps. This has, in a sense, Chinese knockoff preamps that don't sound quite the same. So you don't get, in a sense, the same Midas warmth as you do on the M32 with this mixer. But say you don't add any gain, like for example, your gain would be set to like 0. Right now on this channel, it's plus 40. When the gain is set to 0, it is ultra transparent. You get no artifacts added whatsoever. It just sounds really good. Honestly, so much to cover on this mixer. It's kind of difficult to think about what to talk about next. I guess we can go into the sends next. So as I explained earlier with the bus sends, this page here would be to send out to all your buses. And if you want to send a pre or post fader or pre-EQ, post-EQ, you get a bunch of different options there. And then you get the option on the final page to send this to your main left and right bus. There are a couple of different ways where you can route your main, where it's like a, what is it called again? Your left, right, and sub, or your left, center, right. So you can set this up as a left, center, right setup if you do want to set it up as that. I keep this obviously as a left, right, and sub, but I don't really use what is called the mono bus on this, which would be sending to the sub. I guess I could, but I really just don't do it that way. Yes. Now, on this mixer as well, there is the ability to have it used as like a talkback mic. So say you had a stage box in another room, you could set this up as like a talkback where you plug in a mic into this, use it as talkback, kind of handy. And then you can generate a bunch of different like tones. You can do a sine wave and then pink and white noise. Which I find is quite handy, especially when I was setting up my studio, to have the sine wave to be able to sweep up the frequencies and like just physically hear like how the volume is affected at each frequency, because obviously everyone's individual ears are completely different, whereas like a measurement mic will always be a measurement mic and it doesn't, in a sense, factor in a person's hearing. So it's good to have the ability to sweep a sine wave across a spectrum when you are, in a sense, correcting your room, to be able to know what you're hearing is actually true to your ears as well. Yes. What else can I go over in this? There are also a bunch of different, in a sense, like presets that you can save on this. So say I wanted to throw like a preset for a drum room where there's a bunch of overheads and everything, and I just want compression set and everything. You can save presets on this or load the factory ones. I don't really use that for this. But one thing I do use is called the scenes. So basically I store snippets, what's called snippets on this machine, where I can save, in a sense, individual track files and routing and everything, like all the compression, EQ, all the routing. I can save that on this mixer. So when I go to restore a session or work on a session, all I have to do is switch to that individual session, click a button, and then boom, the session is back to its original state of where I left it. Very, very handy in my opinion. Yes, what else is on this mixer and how do I use it? So how I use this mixer is I use the first 16 inputs. Those will always be 16 inputs coming from my DAW. And then I use the the 17 through 32, channels 17 through 32 is all my analog gear. So all these 16 inputs are set to my 17 through 32 layer. And with this mixer, I guess this is where I talk about the routing abilities. So with this, I can record exactly what's being done on, say, this vocal channel, and this is what you're hearing right now. I can record that directly into the DAW, and that is at a zero latency pace. And I can record 16 channels in, as well as sending 16 channels, if I wanted to, back out to the first kind of 16 channels on this mixer. Yes, very, very robust. And the reason I got this mixer is because at the time I was playing live a lot, but I also didn't have a digital or an interface that had multiple channels, and I was looking for a multi-channel interface because this is when I started picking up all this gear, and I was using basically the Octatrack. All its inputs were going, or I should say, the Korg stuff was going into the Octatrack, and out the Octatrack was going into a 2-channel USB interface. And this is when I got, in a sense, gear addicted, and I needed an interface that was also a mixer at the same time. And this is when the Behringer x32 came out, and I was using the M32 at work at the time, so I was very aware of the workflow and how easy it is to use this mixer and achieve results that I wanted to achieve. So yes, this is like another key centerpiece of my studio setup. Originally, I was using the USB card, so it's a USB interface that plugs into your computer to record, send and record and everything. But as of recent, I upgraded to Dante, and I'll probably be doing a video on Dante because it is kind of new and it is still expensive, but I see it as the future of how should I say, the future of routing and just like interfacing audio from analog to digital. I don't know how to best describe that. It's just the future, so I'll do a separate video on that. But I do use Dante, which brings down the latency a lot more, and allows me to start creating like a network in my space here, where I don't always need XLR. I can just run CAT cables or Ethernet cables to wherever I want to run them to record or to send audio to. Yes, we'll have to cover that in a different video. But yes, this is like an all-in-one wonder house of a interface / mixer. It sounds good. It sounds transparent. Whatever you send into it and then into the DAW and then back out the DAW into this, everything sounds exactly the same. I currently run this at 24-bit 48 kilohertz. You also have the option on this to run this at, what is it again, 44.1. There was talks years ago about them upgrading this to 96 kilohertz. I don't think they're ever going to do that. So if you are looking for a console to run at 96K, there are options out there, and that's really the only downfall of this setup right now is I don't really want to be investing the money in a digital mixer that has 96K. I don't want to be spending that money at the moment, so I'm kind of limited to 48K. Now, that's not to say that the audio coming out isn't analog and the audio coming in isn't analog. It is still true AD/DA conversion. Just all the plugins on this mixer and how everything is routed, that is all done digitally. The converters are good on this. They're actually really good on this. I highly suggest these converters. They're just, everything on this thing is just transparent and wonderful. And for the price point, like I think if you shopped around on Reverb and got a used one, you could probably maybe pay $1,400 for this producer edition. Or if you do want the one with a ton of different faders and everything, the regular X32, they're out there. It seems like people are holding on to them because they are such a good, cheap, affordable piece of gear that just works really well. My only complaint with this so far, And this just comes down to build quality. Is a couple of the faders have either lost their little elastic bands, because this does have flying faders. You can see, for example, this fader right here does not respond to where it should be responding to. Um, that I do need to fix at some point. It's been on my bucket list for a while, but I really just don't want to open this up at the moment. And the faders are cheap. I think you can get them for like $60. So it's not too bad, but it's just time consuming to open this up, and you have to be very delicate with everything. And sometimes I'm not a very delicate person. Now, another complaint in this, it's the encoders again. The encoders right here, to be able to like kind of scroll through stuff and change stuff. Like say, for example, right here, when I twist this, it doesn't quite react quite right. Now, there's a couple of faders or encoders that don't quite react right. I don't know what it is with encoders. They just like, maybe these ones are cheap encoders, or maybe they're the same encoders as the Blofeld there. Just they've kind of get very sensitive and don't quite work right. But it's not the end of the world. It is what it is. I love this thing. To be able to have a spectrum analyzer to look at when you're using analog and everything is great. This also has, what is it, the bar spectrum analyzer, so you can see it kind of scrolling across there. When I start to talk louder, you can see the frequency across the spectrum there. It's kind of nice to have. Yes, I highly, highly, highly suggest, if you have an analog setup and you want to play live as well as like do recording at the same time with all your different pieces of gear, I would highly suggest the Behringer x32 for your interface and like your console, your main